All right, so let's go ahead and get a broad perspective of what transpired yesterday as we hand to Mark back.
Well, thank you, Chamberlain. I have with me this morning Mr. Akere Mona, who is the chairman, International Anti-Corruption Conference, and also former vice president, Transparency International Africa, and also member of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, a body established by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and chaired by former South African President Thabo Mbeki. Mr. Mona, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily.
Well, thank you for having me.
A lot of work you've been doing on fighting corruption, especially on the African continent.
That is correct.
Are we seeing any results?
Well, it is hard to say because corruption mutates and the form is changing all the time. But I think the discourse is getting more and more heavy, and the conscious level is rising, which is a good thing. But I think we have to get concrete because for some reason Africans have gotten greedier, really greedier. And the magnitude, while those engaged in this corrosive activity is reducing, but the magnitude is very heavy. And I think that's where we must work. And I think the political will is most important. The politicians have to give traction to the process. And I think that from that point of view, you know, the political will appears in your country, which is a good thing, I think.
When you say Africans are getting greedier, who precisely, what category of people are you referring to? Is it the people being led or the leaders?
Oh, the leaders, obviously, those who have their hands in the till. There's no doubt about that. And they've gotten really greedy to the point where one even doubt their own patriotism. You see, when people really enrich themselves at the expense of their own citizens, brothers and sisters, that's sad. I make this similarity with, I'm a Christian, and I think that, you know, we Christians say that Jesus judged, he taught, and he healed. And if in your country you can take care of justice, health, and education, then you're halfway there. But these sectors suffer greatly because of corruption. And there's something the Pope said when he was in Brazil. He said that you judge a country by the way it treats the poorest. And I think that's where it is. And when people are hurting and others are buying mansions and stuff like that, it's not fair. It's not even morally correct. So I think something has to be done. And I think the measures have to be drastic. And people must stop accepting the fact that corruption is a way of life. You know, it is not proper. When I spoke yesterday, I told the story of what happened to me once at Lagos Airport. I was coming from Yaoundé going to Ivory Coast, and I went through Lagos Airport, and there were two Nigerians arguing very seriously about corruption. And you had a governor, I think, who had just been pardoned. And one Nigerian was really annoyed, very annoyed that, you know, corruption, this guy, how could they let him go and stuff like that. And after ranting for about 10 minutes, his colleague looked at him and said, "Your money loss." You know, and that attitude of people feeling that government money is somebody else's money, that anybody who can feed from it is well and good, that I think is something we have to fight against. Citizens have to understand that they are custodians of government money, and they have to fight and help those who are in charge of fighting against corruption to work harder, I think.
Quite a number of initiatives going on there. I think this panel, this high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa found that, I think we're looking at in the region of, is it something around $5 trillion leaving the African continent?
Every year, it's been 50 and 80, maybe $60 billion.
That's times 10.
It is, 60 billion every year, and that is about 2 to 3 times more than the development aid we get. So if there's any kind of logic, you can say if you could just stop that. We don't need to get a dime out of for development aid because we have all the money sitting here. And that is what caused the ECA and the AU to put in place the illicit financial flows high-level panel to see how we could identify the kind of money that's leaving our country illegally.
And the outrage also accompanied, or that should accompany, knowing that that sort of money is leaving the African continent, seems to be absent.
It is true. I think that since the destination countries were benefiting, they tended to talk about corruption in terms of the African kleptocrats. But the fact is that, it takes two to tango. And as I said in my keynote speech yesterday, the banks, and I see your president talking about them, the banks, because the World Bank, they have an issue they call Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative. So if they call this money as stolen money, therefore the person keeping it is a handler, okay? And therefore the banks handle stolen goods. And they must be called out. And I think the acting president was clear about this yesterday. And it's important to know that, these banks, they keep this money. When it's frozen, 6, 7, 8 years, what happens to this money? So I think that the outrage must increase. And corruption must be made risky business. And when I mean risky, it's as risky as closing your eyes and crossing a busy street here in Abuja. It must be made risky business. I think in Africa, so far, it is not risky business. Not in Cameroon I come from, and not from Nigeria, from what I heard yesterday.
Now, if you look at the amount of work, quite a number of initiatives being made every now and again to see how corruption can be fought. They came up with the Transparency Index, and you would think that countries would be embarrassed enough, not to want to be low on that index. They will want to rise. You work a lot with African leaders. What is the zeal that you see, or the will? Did you just pay lip service to the work of ensuring that their countries are
Well, they worry about the index because it looks like naming and shaming. And they want to know how up and down they move the scale. I don't think they're even worried about the impact of stopping corruption on the well-being of the poorest. So to me, it's a facade. I was in one country, and the minister says, well, listen, we have 3 ministers in jail, and this in jail, you see we're fighting corruption. I say, Minister, respectfully, you're just proving that there's corruption in your country since you're locking up people. So that shouldn't impact directly on your classification on the TI index. So I think there's a lot of lip service. And more, the demand for the fight against corruption is increasing by the citizens. And every single election in Africa nowadays is fought on one theme: fight against corruption. It was the case in your country. It's the case now in South Africa. It was the case in Kenya. It is the case all over. It's the case in Tunisia. It was the case in Egypt. It means there's something wrong, and the people are hurting, and the leaders should hear.
It's Hydra-headed. Listening to the acting president yesterday, he was talking about how there is a media war. In some instances, corruption fights back.
Correctly.
What would you say, or how would you say that what would you say you've noticed the greatest challenge in this fight against corruption?
Well, the greatest challenge to me is where you have a very corrupt private sector, which is very powerful and rich. It also happens where there is state capture by a few oligarchs in a country. And it's very insidious because it really permeates the whole system. There is this thing they call public-private partnership nowadays, which is sold now to Africa as, It is good, but the fact is that if you're going to a country where the sector is captured, where the state is captured, so really the private sector is the same people, the public sector is the same people, and then there's the foreign investors. So you have the same people sitting around the table. And it is sad because in such a context, the systemic failure. So, as you say, the countries where the state capture is where it is very perverse. The state capture can be through drug lords. It can be through a private sector that was very instrumental in funding the person who got into power. And these are different means. And unfortunately, we are seeing that democracy, with all the advantages it brings, comes with this element of state capture because you need so much money to get elected. And afterwards, you got to pay back.